My name is Holly Sanders. I'm 31 years old, and 3 days after coming home from the hospital with my newborn daughter, I walked through my own front door expecting quiet, expecting rest, expecting my husband to carry the car seat in while I finally exhaled after 9 months of waiting. Instead, I found my in-laws sitting in our living room like they'd been holding court for hours. My mother-in-law perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap. My father-in-law standing by the window, arms crossed, watching me the way a man watches something he's already decided he doesn't want in his house. This is Second Seat Stories, and this is what happened 3 days after I gave birth. My husband, Miles, froze in the doorway behind me. I remember thinking, why didn't he warn me they were coming? The baby stirred in my arms, tiny and warm and 3 days old, completely unaware she'd already become the subject of a war she hadn't asked to be part of. Before I could even set down the diaper bag, my father-in-law spoke. His voice flat, rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in the car. We're not putting our last name on a child that might not be his. The room went silent except for the baby's soft breathing. I felt my whole body go cold, the kind of cold that starts in your chest and spreads down through your arms until your fingers go numb. I looked at Miles, waiting for him to say something. Anything. To defend me. To defend our daughter. He just stood there, jaw tight, eyes fixed on his father like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd been handed too fast. My mother-in-law smiled then. Not a kind smile. The smile of someone who's already won an argument in her own head. Pack your things, she said, like she was the one who lived in this house. I didn't argue. Didn't cry, though every part of me wanted to. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with people who've already decided you're guilty is like screaming into a closed room. The sound just bounces back and makes you feel smaller. So instead, I walked past both of them, laid my daughter gently in her bassinet, and went to the kitchen counter, where I'd left a plain white envelope from the hospital 3 days earlier. I hadn't even opened it. I'd planned to file it away with the birth certificate paperwork, unbothered, because I'd never once doubted whose child I was holding. But standing in a room full of accusation, I realized that envelope was about to answer a question nobody had the courage to ask me directly. I picked it up, walked back into the living room, and without a word, handed it to Miles. He looked at me, confused, then down at the envelope, fingers slowly peeling back the flap. Inside was a paternity confirmation, something the hospital runs automatically alongside newborn screening when a father requests it for insurance purposes. Something Miles had quietly asked for weeks before our daughter was even born. Not because he doubted me, but because his own father had once, in passing, mentioned wanting proof for the family trust. Miles unfolded the page. I watched his eyes move down it, line by line, until they stopped. Something shifted in his face. Hardened. Then he looked up, not at me, not at the baby, but directly at his mother. The silence in that room changed texture completely. It wasn't the silence of accusation anymore. It was the silence of a woman realizing the ground beneath her had just cracked. My father-in-law shifted his weight, suddenly unsure where to look. My mother-in-law's smile was gone, replaced by something tighter, more brittle. Miles folded the paper back along its crease, slow and deliberate, and set it down on the coffee table between his parents, like he was placing a verdict in front of a jury that had just convicted the wrong person. He didn't hand it to them. He didn't need to. You need to leave, he said, quieter than I expected, somehow louder than any shout could have been. My father-in-law opened his mouth to argue. Miles repeated himself, slower this time, each word its own sentence. My mother-in-law reached for the paper on the table. Miles placed his hand flat over it, and for the first time since I'd known him, I watched him choose me, choose our daughter, without hesitation, without needing permission from the people who raised him. I stood there holding my sleeping baby, watching the two people who'd just tried to erase her existence from our family realize they'd badly underestimated how far the truth would travel once it left that envelope, and exactly what it would cost them. His hand stayed flat on that paper for a long moment. In that silence, I watched his mother's face shift from confusion to something closer to panic. The kind of panic that comes when a lie you've been comfortable living inside suddenly has a hole punched through it. My father-in-law, Vernon, cleared his throat, trying to recover some footing. Said it was just a formality, that they only wanted to be careful about the family name, that no one was accusing anyone of anything. Miles wasn't having it. He picked the paper back up, walked it over to me instead of them, and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that his daughter's paternity had never been the question that mattered tonight. The real question was why his own parents thought it was acceptable to ambush his wife 3 days after childbirth, with an accusation they hadn't even bothered to whisper to him privately first. His mother, Diane, tried to soften her tone, said she was only protecting the family, protecting the trust, protecting what mattered. Miles asked her plainly if she'd ever once considered that what mattered was the woman standing in front of her, holding his child, exhausted, healing, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Diane didn't have an answer for that. She looked at Vernon instead, hoping he'd rescue the moment. But Vernon was still staring at the paper in Miles's hand, like it had personally betrayed him. I sat down slowly on the arm of the couch, my daughter still asleep against my chest, and for the first time since walking through that door, I let myself breathe. Miles crouched beside me, hand gentle on our daughter's back, and told his parents that effective immediately, they would not be coming to the house unannounced. They would not be commenting on his marriage, and they would not be anywhere near his daughter until they understood the difference between being family and being a threat. Vernon tried one last time, arguing they had rights as grandparents. Miles's answer was calm, absolute. Rights are earned through respect, not blood. And right now, neither of you has earned anything but distance. I watched Diane's composure finally crack, her hand pressing against her mouth the same way it had earlier, when she thought she was watching her son's marriage collapse under her own manufactured suspicion. Except now the collapse was happening to something else entirely. The version of the family she'd always imagined she controlled. They left without another word. The front door closing behind them felt less like an ending, and more like a boundary being drawn in permanent ink. For a long moment, Miles and I just stood there in the quiet living room, the baby still sleeping, the lamp humming softly in the corner, and I finally let the tears come, not from sadness, from something closer to relief. The kind that arrives after your body's been braced for a blow that never landed the way you feared. Miles pulled me in, careful not to disturb our daughter, and apologized for not stepping in, the second his parents opened their mouths, admitted he'd been too stunned to react in the moment, promised it would never happen again. In the weeks that followed, we didn't hear from Vernon or Diane at all. No calls, no messages, no attempts to smooth things over. Honestly, the silence felt like the healthiest thing that had happened to our family in months. Miles used that time to quietly restructure the family trust his father had once threatened to withhold, removing any language tied to bloodline verification, placing everything solely in our daughter's name. Protected, untouchable, permanent. When Vernon eventually reached out months later, requesting a meeting, Miles agreed on one condition: that any future conversation include a genuine apology directed at me. Not vague statements about misunderstandings. A direct acknowledgement of what they'd done. Vernon and Diane showed up to that meeting smaller somehow, more careful with their words. The apology came slowly, awkwardly, but I could see it cost them something to say it, which told me it was at least real. We didn't rush back into closeness. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation. It rebuilds through consistency, through months of small moments where people either show up the way they say they will, or they don't. Slowly, cautiously, Vernon and Diane began showing up the right way. Respecting boundaries, asking permission before visits, speaking to me directly instead of around me. My daughter is older now. She has no idea how close she came to growing up in a family fractured by an accusation that took one envelope to destroy. But I know, and Miles knows, and that shared memory has made our marriage stronger than it might have ever been without it, because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you end up teaching you exactly who's willing to fight for you when it matters most. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. This is Second Seat Stories, and there's a new one every day.